Welcome, everybody. We are extremely honored and excited at Raven to feature one of our town halls where we have the opportunity to bring together the most innovative and impactful leaders in fields and be in discussion about policy, narrative, programs, all the things that are on people's minds. And we have just a beautiful one for you this afternoon. I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Eduardo Soto, who has been a leader and a principal in our government affairs practice for many years, and brings a brilliance and a heart to the work, which we all appreciate. Eduardo, over to you. And to our guests, thank you so much for what you're doing every day to make America smarter and fairer. We deeply appreciate you, and we're just so honored to feature you this afternoon. Eduardo, over to you.
Thank you so much, Robert. Thank you to our panelists and to everybody who is joining us today. There's so much brilliance on this panel and in the audience that is tuning in. I am so excited. The amount of brain power on this panel rivals the biggest data centers in the country. But we can only hope that this awesome conversation will not affect your utility bills. Let me get started by introducing our esteemed panelists, starting with Álvaro Bedoya, who is a senior advisor at the American Economic Liberties Project, appointed by President Joe Biden to serve as commissioner at the FTC back in May 2022, serving in that role until his resignation in June of last year. Before his confirmation, Bedoya was chief counsel to Senator Al Franken of Minnesota and helped establish the Senate subcommittee on privacy that has been so key to these conversations upon its creation back in 2010. After the Senate, Alvaro founded the Center on Privacy and Technology at Georgetown Law, which conducted in-depth research into face surveillance and the surveillance of religious and ethnic minorities. We're joined also by Catherine Bracy, a civic technologist and community organizer whose work focuses on the intersection of technology and political and economic inequality. She is the founder and CEO of Tech Equity. She was previously Code for America's Senior Director of Partnerships and Ecosystem, where she grew Code for America's Brigade program into a network of over 50,000 civic tech volunteers in 80 plus cities across the US. During the 2012 election cycle, she was director for Obama for America's Technology Field Office in San Francisco, the first of its kind in American political history. Last but certainly not least, we're joined by Gus Rossi, who serves as senior director at Amidior Network. He leads strategic initiatives on tech policy, advocacy, and innovation, focusing on antitrust and competition policy, children's online privacy, artificial intelligence, and supporting small and medium-sized tech companies at the national, state, and international levels. Prior to joining Omidyar, Gus led global policy initiatives at Public Knowledge, an advocacy-oriented nonprofit that promotes freedom of expression, an open internet, and access to affordable communications tools. While at the Inter-American Development Bank, he served as director of the Multilateral Investment Fund, a $100 million fund for social innovation in Latin America. Wow. Okay, so I'm really excited to kick off this conversation. We're going to aim to strike a balance with our questions and the conversation between that big picture USA Today type perspective and the into the weeds Federal Register granular policy details in Raben fashion. My first question is to all of our panelists. When it comes to the role of Congress and federal agencies, it is fair to say that the US is lagging in terms of comprehensive federal standards for consumer or user-facing tech regulation, just in general. Although we are seeing states applying some pressure. When you zoom out, before we even started seeing a rollout of generative AI, what do you feel were the biggest public interest concerns around the tech sector? And I'll have Gus, since you're next up on my screen, I'll have you kick us off.
Thank you. Thanks, Eduardo, for your kind words. And thanks everyone for being here. I think that it's important to like in a day like today to contextualize what happened over the last 2 days in the courts. We saw yesterday that like a jury in California determined that the way that social media companies are responsible for the way they design their products and services and for the mental health of of their users. The day before, we saw that is also a jury in New Mexico that determined that that social media companies are responsible when they for respecting consumer protection laws in the states. And so much of that has to do with the fact that Americans are concerned about the effect that social media has uh, on um, on on the mental health and well-being of kids, and we're seeing that as well happening on what has to do with chatbots and AI. So that is, I think that the general feel that technology is oftentimes developed without giving consumers, users, citizens agency, an opportunity to shape how tools are deployed and developed is a key cause of concern that is driving so much of the public sentiment around technology, and it's also pushing more and more legislators at the state and at the federal level to take things seriously. Obviously, we're behind in terms of like kid safety rules and privacy rules and AI rules, but I'm sure we will get into that in the conversation.
Yeah, I'll just add, I mean, it's certainly true that I think voters, citizens, everyday people are evaluating their, how they think about AI and its likely impact on society through the lens of what social media companies have done. And obviously, some of the companies that are sort of leading the way on building AI are also social media platforms. And so people are looking at the experience we've had with social media and really evaluating AI's potential risks and opportunities through that lens. And so, to Gus's point, I mean, the jury decisions over the last couple of days point to a fact that there's some deep unease that these are the people who are promising to build this technology that people, they're just simply not trusted. I think in addition to that, AI adds a level of risk or economic risk that didn't necessarily exist for social, how people experienced social media. And that is adding to this heightened sense of mistrust, unease. And people are starting, if you look at polling or focus groups on this topic, people are really evaluating AI through the lens of their economic insecurity, and AI for them really is showing up as an economic issue. And so, in terms of the context that people are bringing into this, the tech industry and how they evaluate power, and I know this is, Alvaro's area of expertise, but the sort of structural elements of the economy are really underlying how people are thinking about where AI is going to take us.
Hey, thank you, Catherine. So I actually want to continue along the lines of what Catherine said about the economic problems here and the economic fears here, because to your question, Eduardo, about what is the gap that public interest isn't addressing, which is how I heard your question. I want to flag an area that is outside of the kind of consumer or user space and centers more about labor. Because what I think we're starting to see is that state legislatures are starting to catch up with some of the consumer-facing issues and are very quickly pushing out bans, for example, on algorithmic pricing. But a much smaller number are addressing algorithmic wage setting and some of the issues around digitally scanning workers and replicating them and really pervasive forms of AI management, which is from the very, the most blue collar jobs to the fanciest white collar jobs are increasingly becoming pervasive. And so that I think is one big gap. And that's set against what I think is a really, I've been trying to find the right words to describe this, but like a lack of vision and imagination in meeting this moment. Because on the one side, you have people like Dario Amodei saying, oh, well, 50% of white collar jobs are going to be gone in the next 5 years. And we're going to have to think more about charity and we're going to have to think X and Y and Z. And you have CEOs like Amodei, like Altman, like all the other big AI CEOs basically not seeing anything around them that they cannot take. Can we scan the sum total of the world's books despite this little thing called copyright? Yes. Can we put out these parasocial chatbots like OpenAI and pivot into quote unquote erotic conversations with users and quote unquote erotica, to quote Mr. Altman? Can we put forward these chatbots that, are designed to convince young people, let alone adults, that they are their girlfriends or boyfriends? Yes. Can we move into a new town and basically duplicate the energy demands on that town's infrastructure and then, like you're sitting at a restaurant, pass the tab over to the regular human being across the table from you? Yes, 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 yes. And on the other hand of the equation, you've got a whole lot of elected officials being like, oh, we need guidelines for AI. We need to do a commission for AI, guardrails for AI. And for me, the only folks who've been talking about this in a way that meets the moments is organized labor. And you have Sean Fain talking about, hey, look, you have 400% more productivity. Congratulations. We're moving to a 32-hour work week. And really starting to make the claims that I think are necessary against this we'll take everything, thank you very much attitude that some of the AI execs have. And so yeah, that would be the gap I see. I see a need to more aggressively meet the claims of AI companies in replacing workers, and the need to meet those claims with a much bigger vision of what protection should look like and what a level playing field should look like when it comes to employers versus their employees.
Thank you all so much. That is such a perfect way to set the table. And, of course, we start the conversation with the sector that engendered, right, generative AI. But as we look at generative AI itself, and we look at these concerns across economics, children's safety, labor, consumer-facing public interest issues, I also hear from Catherine and Alvaro in particular, the potential of public interest benefits that we could stand to gain, right? That could be realized under the right circumstances, like with the United Auto Workers leader pitch for shorter work weeks to account for increased productivity. What are other potential examples of those public interest benefits that could be realized under the right circumstances? And Catherine, we'll start with you.
Yeah, I mean, to Elro's point about like big, bold imagination, actually the electorate has big ideas, and they do have a vision. When you talk to them about like what AI could do to make their lives better, you hear ideas about, making the conversations they have with their doctors more meaningful because their doctor isn't like staring into a computer screen the entire time they're in the appointment. They have more time to spend with them. Their commutes are shorter because, traffic AI is able to, optimize traffic better. Grocery prices are going down instead of up because, of certain optimizations in the supply chain. So they see the benefit of technology. What they're concerned about is, the people and companies who are building it. And I think there are two main questions that they ask themselves, and they don't like the answers they're hearing from the industry. The first is, what is this technology for? The answer they're getting is, to destroy your job, and we have no solution for what you're going to do after that. I mean, that really is what, the companies are saying. And the second is, well, how do we share in the benefits that this technology is creating? If, to the point about 32-hour work weeks, like if this technology is creating all of this new wealth and value, where is it going? And what they see is that it is really just AI is really just an accelerator of sucking money up into the top, 0.01%. I mean, they literally can name the people who they believe are benefiting from this. It's not even like a white collar versus blue collar thing anymore. It's like 25 people versus the entire rest of the population. And, in that context, it's like, well, I have good ideas about what this technology can do. You guys aren't doing that. So in that case, I don't want this data center here. I'd rather spend that electricity or whatever, that money on something else. And until and unless, we see a broad shift towards building things that are actually making people's lives better. And, to use Gus's word, which I think is probably the most important single word in this whole conversation, which is agency. And as long as people don't have agency over how this technology is coming into their lives, then you're going to start to see the backlash grow.
And I think that it's interesting what you're saying, Catherine, because when you look at the polling on data centers, for example, opposition flips to over like 40% approval when people hear that data centers are going to be built using renewable energy, right? And so people are like not against all technology all the time. I think that it's like the unfair imposition of the of rules and deployments of technology in ways that are done without consultation with the people affected and without showing potential benefits is providing a collective harm. There is a universe in which we deploy AI to make it easier for people to access public benefits and services. We are instead choosing to use AI to surveil them and make their lives harder, to track them, as Alvaro was saying, like at every moment of the day at work. Um, there is a there is a there are um, there are things that could be done to help users, and instead, because we don't have rules of the game, because we are not paying attention to deployment, because we are ignoring the perspective of workers. Like, there are many workers that would like to see technology making their jobs easier and less tedious, and would like to spend time learning about how to use technology to be more productive and spend, and protect their time and their bodies more. Instead, what they're hearing, like Catherine was saying, is like, we're gonna deploy this thing so you go away. Like, no one no one likes that. And by the way, in the process, we're gonna make sure that your kids' mental health gets worse, which is like the deal that we have at hand right now.
Yeah, I mean, it's almost cartoonish, the level of like, if you designed the worst message you could possibly pitch about what this new technology was going to bring into the world, it's hard to think of how it could be much worse than what they're selling it as now.
That's right. Uh, Alvaro, were you going to add something? In that case, I want to go back to Gus. Catherine made the point that we can name the couple dozen beneficiaries from all of the investing and the sort of circular passing around of tens of billions of dollars that we're seeing with the deployment of generative AI. Do startups in this sector stand a chance, Gus? Did they ever, right? Are there public interest implications to the fact that we're seeing just a few incumbents sort of dominate?
Yeah, I mean, look, we are choosing to um, create a set of institutions and incentives that are leading towards more and more market concentration. Like, things they don't have to be like this, right? We could choose to limit. We could choose to make online services and AI services interoperable. We could choose to allow people to move their data around. We could make public policy choices to make sure that users can pick the services that are going to be deployed on their phones, so they can pick different agents for their phone and different models for their phone. We're just like not making any of those choices at the moment. There is going to be an opportunity with open source software and open source AI. Right now, the problem that we have is that we're choosing this dichotomy that, because there are some potential dangers with open source, we're just like effectively choosing not to allow them to be deployed. And this is like all these are all being public policy choices that we're making. Um, at the same time, there are like hundreds of very successful startups that are like leaving Y Combinator and other accelerators right now, that are gaining clients and gaining traction. We just need to make sure that they are not squeezed out of the market in the process.
Yeah, and to put a finer point on what Gus said, I mean, all of these startups, we looked at sort of the last great, generation of startup growth that, the internet fueled. You could start a company on this really powerful technical infrastructure for close to nothing, right? I mean, it was super easy for somebody to, this is like three guys in a garage era. Now, if you want to build a tech company, an AI company, you have access to four companies, maybe that you are fully dependent on, right? So all the money you're raising is basically going to Anthropic, Google, OpenAI to pay for access to their models. That's not a great recipe for a healthy, vibrant, diverse economy. And so if we really want to make to Gus's point, make the decisions that we would need to make in order to spur, widespread economic growth through startups, we would have to see more open source models. You'd also have to see maybe some government investment in some of this infrastructure. Or, I think this is something that we should really take seriously, is whether or not we should maybe nationalize the underlying foundation models that these companies are building. Let them continue to sell their chatbots, but nationalize the models. I mean, if we think AI, if we take them at their word that this technology is as powerful as they say it is, then that feels like the logical extension there. The other thing I want to add to that point is that, for some reason, venture capitalists seem to get a pass in all of this when really they have created the logic that companies and startups are responding to, and that sort of drive the incentives that really create monopoly power in the first place. And so if we are going to get to a world where we have vibrancy in the startup community, where startups are addressing market needs that are currently being ignored, we're going to need to sort of reform the way that we distribute capital in the innovation ecosystem, and that's going to require investors to think differently about what investable markets look like, what how financial returns are aligned with societal outcomes, and there are policy questions that raises as well. So we really need to think about the capital environments here too.
And I also like
Good.
wanna,
Oh,
since
good.
Albert is here, I think that there's a interesting counterfactual here. I'm not convinced that um, Anthropic, for example, would be an independent company, wouldn't have been that it developed and exploded at a moment where there were strong antitrust enforcers in power during the Biden administration. I'm not. This. It's a company that has like a significant amount of investment from Amazon and from Google. I think that the reason why we have this like new players in the space is because the technology exploded at a moment in time where there were like uh, um, there were actors that were trying to make sure that the market remain open, and we don't have that anymore.
So I want
As
to,
one of those actors.
yeah, no, look, I don't want to, I'll leave it and appreciate the what you're saying, Gus. I'll leave it for others to speculate about that specific company. I think what I want to add some more about is what you said, Catherine, about the environment the companies are entering in. We have allowed to grow up these three, four, five massive companies that control the choke points of the technology as it is today, which are compute, data, and access to a platform with lots of users. And so it wasn't an act, if you look at Meta, for example, or Google, these companies, I think particularly in the case of Meta, basically didn't grow through competition. They grew by acquiring their competitors. And and so when these startups go out into the world, they are confronted with this world where there's just these five massive mountains around them, and it is exceedingly difficult to figure out a route that avoids those mountains. And so what I think we need to start talking about, and this is a long process, by the way, because you don't move a mountain, overnight, but you do need to start. So there was a real missed moment in the Google trial where Judge Mehta refused to break up Google. And again, I don't want to speculate about that specific instance, but there's been a generation of judges that have been effectively indoctrinated into a certain view of antitrust by these junkets where you'd go and you'd learn about neoliberal antitrust enforcement from the lights of the neoliberal academe. We need to move away from that. I very much appreciate Senator Gallego saying expressly that we should say to companies, hey, if you engage in a massive merger that you have effectively lobbied away any scrutiny around by hiring the right set of lobbyists and currying favor with the president, either through those lobbyists or by censorship, we fully plan to break up those mergers, if we regain power, when we regain power. The other thing I would stress is that, in 1890, the antitrust movement, the anti-monopoly movement began around 1887, 1888, and it took a good 30 or 40 years to put in place the set of laws that could operate and did operate effectively through the 40s, 50s, 60s, and into the 70s. And so this is a long process. We can do everything we can to accelerate it, but we do need to start it if we want that better outcome for startups. And I will add to what you said, Gus, that when I was in, it was extraordinary to see the number of people who would criticize us, who were very clearly paid by big tech. And unless you actually knew startup founders, you might lose sight of the fact that the work we did was actually very popular among a group of startup founders because they wanted that level playing field. They didn't want necessarily to sell out. They wanted to build the next big deal company. Some of them didn't. Some of them wanted the easy paycheck, and to go to the FANG companies or whatever. But among a certain group of startup founders, the work we did was extremely popular. And so this idea that competition policy is bad for the little guy is the opposite. The little guy, the startup, generally like a level playing field and like a world where they don't have to kowtow to the big guys.
Well, the only thing I would add to that, and this is another reason why this conversation about venture capital is so important, is that the founders might like it. And I wrote a book about venture capital last year for which I interviewed a bunch of entrepreneurs who had a very ambivalent sense about having to raise money from venture capitalists in order to start their companies. They are not necessarily in the driving seat here. It's the investors who have a heavy, heavy incentive to see them get acquired by these larger companies. And so in many ways, that capital ecosystem that sort of rewards investors when monopolies are created or fed is a root problem here that is getting a disproportionate lack of attention. And so again, we need capital structures that can fund startups that are not where the investors are not incentivized to push them into the hands of these larger companies. And I know this is something that Omidyar has worked a lot on and invested a lot of time and money into, and I think that's really important, critical work to this larger conversation about how AI is going to affect society.
I am so glad. Well, first of all, so grateful and blown away by this panel. But Catherine, that you bring up that dimension of the conversation, because my next question is about other enforcement gaps besides the example of competition. Um, and I wanted to ask Alvaro because you've remarked on this over the years about how we cannot, and I'm paraphrasing, please correct me if I'm misstating a point I've heard you make. But we cannot be distracted by the newness of generative AI such that we stop enforcing existing laws, right? When these tools are used to break them. So I wanted to ask you, beyond competition, and Catherine appears to suggest that there's a securities and investment element also that we should be looking at that body of law. Where are those enforcement gaps? Where do you see them, and how can they be undermining? How may they be undermining the public interest?
A word on that newness thing, I think, and I can flesh out a little bit what I mean by that. We protect the small and the new, not just because it's new, but also because it's small. They may not have the resources to follow, complex legal systems, complex set of laws at the state and federal level, sometimes at the municipal level. But when a company, I think OpenAI got like 100 million users for ChatGPT within a month or something of launching it, any kind of deference any kind of solicitousness that we might extend to a small business or a small startup needs to go away really quickly. And I think the reverse needs to happen, because there you have a scenario where you have a brand new product that its developers very clearly pushed out the door very quickly, being used by tens of millions of people. To your question, though, about what other than competition law do we need to apply, all the other laws need to apply. And there is this weird saying that I hear less nowadays, but still hear sometimes, is that AI is unregulated. And like, AI is regulated as much as literally any other product, in the sense that all the existing laws apply to it. So unfair trade practices laws apply to it. Unfair competition laws apply to it. Product safety laws apply to it, as we saw with the jury yesterday in California. And so there, I think what is valuable about the jury verdict is that it's reminding people there is no magic about these things. At the end of the day, this was a product liability case. These things, if they hurt people, should be held liable just like everything else. So yeah, I think it's all the laws that need to be applied equally strongly. And by the way, because I'm trying to track the stuff around this trial, which is moving pretty quickly, I just saw news that today OpenAI officially shelved plans for its quote unquote erotic chatbot, which, like, it really boggles your mind that if a billionaire company is doing as well as it says it does, it probably wasn't planning to pivot into pornography, but that's what it was planning to do. But directly as a result of this verdict, it's decided to shelve these plans. So my hope is that this does reverberate, as it already seems to be doing, but a whole lot more.
Can I just add one thing on that? I mean, it is true there are, laws that are already on the books that should be applied to AI. The thing we're missing is enforcement capacity. And while the same laws may apply, understanding how and whether and when an AI has, broken that law, and then ultimately who is responsible when an AI breaks that law is something that is new. And in some cases, we do need new legislation in order to make clear where the liability falls, and also gives people rights to understand how those technologies are being used on them. I mean, in some cases, the companies don't even know how these tools are, for example, using your personal data to determine whether a landlord should rent an apartment to you. Now, that's an area, obviously, that if a landlord were just looking you up and down and making a decision based on your race or, religion, whether or not to rent to you, they would be liable for. It is harder to understand how that is happening with an AI. So we do need different systems, and we need to give the people who are responsible for enforcing those laws the resources that they can actually go after this activity. And there will need to be, court cases that establish legal precedents that we can then, rely on going forward. So there is work here to do, to make sure that there is accountability in this space.
I would also add that, look, and maybe like this here's I differ with Alvaro, which, after like a full week of activities together, Alvaro, it was about time that we disagree on something. But I think that with jury trials, what we've seen is that when you involve the public, people are like, yeah, the law is very clear. The expectations of the law are very clear. These things are wrong. We want something else. My takeaway from the ruling of Judge Mehta on Google search that Albert was referring to, the ruling is two parts. The first part is like, yes, this company is an illegal monopoly. Someone should do something. And the second part is like, but AI is here. No, there's nothing I can do. It's like, that's it. Which, in a way, that's what the saying, right? If a tree falls in the forest and there's no one to hear it, the tree fall? It's like, if antitrust laws are not enforced, like, do we have antitrust laws? So I think that the theory was right 6 years ago, 7 years ago. We have these laws on the books. that we enforced them before with great effect. We should try to do that again in the tech and AI sector. And I think that what we found is that unless we update the laws and we make them very specific and very detailed, and we limit the degree of interpretation for them, we will find that they're insufficient. So I want to say, I don't think it's because the laws that there couldn't be another interpretation with a different judiciary, but I think that if we expect to change and re-educate the judiciary, that's a 50, 100-year plan. I don't think we have that much time. So instead, what we need to do, we're going to have to go through Congress and ask them that they need to clarify what the original legislation meant, and to update it to the existing education and behaviors of the judiciary and the realities of the marketplace, like Catherine was saying. So I think that, unfortunately, we're gonna, like, Congress would have to act.
This is where I do a shameless plug and say that I would love to talk to anybody interested in updating federal laws as with regard to all of these enforcement areas. But this is so fascinating because it also helps us to maybe look around the corner to the concerns that based on concentration in other markets or based in new technologies and how that played out, maybe we can anticipate the issues that we'll be facing tomorrow at various levels. So I wanted to do maybe a lightning round of what you see as the next benchmark for the AI sector. Maybe a true or false statement first, and then in your answer. But are we now in the chase for enough daily active users that so as to make an IPO possible, right? Is that the stage that we're at? Is that why a pivot like what OpenAI was considering was on the table? It's just to secure the maximum number of users, right? What is the next benchmark for the sector if I am reading those tea leaves correctly? Starting with Catherine.
I'm not sure I fully understand the question. So what business benchmark do you think we're looking at, and what does that mean
Yeah.
for?
Yeah, let me put it this way. It seems to me, and you're all the experts here, that the first benchmark was to collect as much data as possible, and that was necessary in order to make an LLM a viable product, right? Then I think all of these incumbents and AI companies were competing for capital, right? Major investments, and to build out the compute to make these products be able to serve all of the people who were using them. What stage are we in now, I guess is my question.
Well, I mean, I think they're now entering the era where they have to prove the business case and justify the level of investment, which means, from where I'm not a business expert here, but like my sense is that there needs to be, their enterprise use case pitch has to pay off, meaning the corporate customers they're selling their products to have to realize a certain level of, financial gain. They have to see, and that means people losing jobs. I mean, there's no way to really make the math work for, these tools to add value at a company unless they are automating some level of work within the company. So you need to start seeing business customers say, I'm willing to pay you, an exorbitant amount of money that at scale is going to make, all of the money you're sort of investing in data centers and infrastructure worth it. And I think that needs to happen. I mean, I think Bain did a report. I don't know if these numbers are still accurate. It was maybe like 9 months ago or so, where they calculated that the AI industry overall was going to need to hit $2 trillion in revenue by 2030. I mean, that's 4 years from now. And I think we're in the like double-digit billions at this point across the entire industry. So they got a lot of work to do in order for investors to meet the expectations that investors have set for them. And that's going to require, like, for that math to work, they have to, put a lot of people out of work.
Feeling vicarious anxiety, putting myself in that position. Alvaro? Oh, Gus,
Oh
I
man,
think
you're
you.
No, no,
you're
all right.
you're irreplaceable. You can't. There's no replacing Eduardo Soto. There's no. Uh, uh, I agree with Catherine's analysis. They do need to prove financial viability. I also I don't think this is a benchmark per se, but um, I think right now the economy is in a very strange sugar high around data center construction. And a lot of American GDP right now, and the reason it doesn't seem to be declining is around the construction of these data centers. And I am concerned that once that wave ebbs, that the actual state of the economy will come into some pretty stark focus. So I think yeah, they're in the phase of proving viability and trying to secure access to the water and electricity that they feel they will need. And hopefully they're right about how effective their products are, in the sense that what I'm very afraid of is what folks like Cory Doctorow say is that, yeah, there will be layoffs. People will be replaced by these AIs, and people will then subsequently discover that the AIs do not nearly perform as well as people did, or they have blind spots that were unexpected, and there will be a much quicker collapse of the sector than we would certainly hope.
Yeah, and the technology
Uh,
doesn't have to get any better than it is today for
hmm.
that sort of scenario to play out.
I think that also it's important to keep in mind that each company has a different reality, right? Like Meta just announced that they essentially took a write-off of $80 billion over the transition to the metaverse that included changing the name of the company from Facebook, someone that everyone understood, to Meta. And they said, like, no. That thing that implied changing the name of the company and like trying to deploy weird avatars, write off. Now we do AI. So is Meta like, does it matter for Meta to break even, or can they just subsidize the attempt to deploy the technology through their existing monopoly in social media? Google is in a different situation. Like it controls all the access to the consumer market. Like it's on your phone, Android and iPhone. It's on your office collaboration tools, Google Docs, Google Sheets. It's on YouTube. Has an infinite amount of like data. Knows you. Is integrated in your personal life. It's an uniquely good place to tap into being the personal assistant, right? And then for other companies, then that's what like the question of like access to government contracts becomes so important. And I think that is what we're seeing as well. I think for all these companies, government contracts are important. Is like the largest buyer in the world, the U.S. government. So that is going to become like a question. So I'm not convinced that the real money is going to be in the consumer market. And I think that if that's the case, it's easy to imagine how Google is uniquely positioned to tap into that. I read that. I think part of the things that changes we've seen, for example, in like OpenAI change of prioritizations, have something to do with the fact that when you see the math, that probably becomes increasingly clear. But yeah, for the future of industry, and it's not only the U.S. government is like the largest one, but you also have the Europeans, the Canadians, the Brits, the Japanese. All these nations, they don't have their national champions, at least yet. They want to buy and they want to trust American technology. But they need to know that when they're contracting with an American company, that company is going to serve them and not the US government. And I think a ton of what we're seeing right now on the news on Anthropic the Department of War should be read also from that dynamic as well.
There's a question in the chat. Are we allowed to go to the chat, Eduardo?
I see it, and I have an
acknowledge it.
idea for how to
Okay.
tackle that. We
Okay,
will get
okay.
to that question.
Okay, I'm sorry.
Before we get to that level of the conversation, though, I want to start at home and talk about state and local enforcement or state and local response, right, to data center build outs, to the growth of the sector. Um, uh, I want to start with Catherine actually on the ways in which inequities that have resulted from the AI race, right? How are communities, local, state governments responding to those? How are they trying to guard against any harms, whether those are environmental, whether they're labor related? What sort of response are you seeing as an organizer, right? Particularly on behalf of vulnerable communities?
Yeah, I mean, I'll say, our tech equities work is focused on California specifically, and data centers are just not as big of an issue here in California than they are in other parts of the country. So I'm less connected to the campaigns that are going on around data centers. But obviously, data centers create, in a way that there didn't exist for social media, a physical object onto which people could project their anger. Data centers are that for AI. And so I think, it's important to see the organizing and activism that's happening around trying to stop data center development as less a response to that physical thing that is being built in a community and more as something that people can project their unease about AI and what it's being built for in general onto. So thinking about it through that lens is really important. I mean, in addition to that, I would say, the two things, well, there's actually three things when you ask people, like, what are you most concerned about? They talk about misinformation and disinformation actually a lot, deep fakes and, fake content of certain kinds that can distort the information environment, which I think is really interesting because it's not necessarily the big policy issue that folks talk about. They talk about it more than they talk about kids' safety, even though that is a very present issue. And then the other thing is jobs. And again, like I said, in the polling, we are starting to see a convergence between how people think about AI and how they think about the health of the economy or their economic prospects. And so for them, AI is really becoming an economic issue. And I've seen polling from, Democratic pollsters that shows that while AI as a single sort of vertical issue in and of itself is sort of middle of the pack of the things that people say they care about, it is the issue that is increasing in importance the most. So the change over time is increasing the most with AI than any other issue. So, I think that there's this range of ways in which people think about AI and how they want to see it treated, and lawmakers are starting to respond in that way. And we
Yeah.
work in California and Sacramento this year. There's 60 plus bills that have been introduced to that touch on AI in some way. Many of them are actually focused on sort of this corporate power angle where we've got antitrust and price fixing legislation. There's also kids safety bills, there's civil rights bills. So we really are sort of attacking the array of concerns that people have that are connected to AI.
And if we look globally, and I'll get to the audience question now. One argument, according to John in our Q&A here, one argument that we hear often is that by regulating AI at all, or by creating a risk of over-regulating the sector in the United States, we risk losing a global race, right? That other countries might step in and have a more competitive sector, right? To the detriment of the US economy. Do you see, Gus, with your expertise on an international level, that sort of race to set only the minimum possible light touch regulation, or are you seeing a different approach taken at that level?
So look, I think there are like two, I think, interesting way to think about it. One is the example of like mRNA vaccines. That's the reason why, it's unpopular sometimes, but the reason why the pandemic was shorter than what people imagined when it began is because we had the capacity to invest in a highly regulated sector, which was like the vaccine and medicine, particularly deploying a new technology like mRNA that is like highly, highly regulated. And that meant that, people trusted the technology. We had the rules to show why it worked. And then there were some mistakes done on the way, and that's created some public concern. But fundamentally, that's why the sector was the exit of the pandemic was so successful and so quick. The second thing to keep in mind is that what we're seeing in Europe, in Canada, and in the UK is that our allies or former allies are questioning their dependence on American technology because they don't trust how it's being built, and they don't trust how it's being deployed, and they don't trust how it's being governed. And that's because they see that there are no rules, or that the rules are enforced in an arbitrary way that doesn't create trust. So I think that if we're falling behind is precisely for this lack of of rules, and we're encouraging other economies that are sophisticated and developed and capable to develop their own alternatives, and that's what's gonna set us back. I also think that there's a trap in the question that is often asked of we're gonna fall behind China. It's what kind of society do we want to be? Do we want to be like China? If the answer is no, then we don't have to do the same things that China does. That's choice.
I'd love to jump in here and John framed this as a devil's advocate question, but I think we have a real risk of underestimating the harm of AI, and it's hard to talk about, but we need to talk about how AI is being used right now in the illegal war in Iran. What has come out is that it used to take weeks to generate a list of 1,000 targets when human military analysts were producing it, again, through a pretty technology-intensive process. Now, according to CBS News, they produce target lists of 1,000 in 4 hours. All the reporting strongly suggests, none has verified, I want to be very clear, none has verified, but there's various strong indications that the bombing of the girls' school in Manab in Iran that resulted in the death of 160 children was likely, again, not verified, but very likely the result of an error in targeting generated by the use of AI. It appears that the targeting system is run through Palantir, through the Maven system at Palantir, but the underlying code is from Anthropic. Other indications include the bombing of a park with a bunch of benches and trees in Tehran called Police Park. Another indication involves the bombing of a separate school, a boys' school, that was named Shahed Khomeini School. And there, of course, it would appear that this school was targeted because it shared the name of the drones that the IRGC uses, which are called Shahed drones, and the name of the family that rules Iran, the Khomeinis. And so there is a cost, and it can be catastrophic. And again, we will not know whether this particular school was targeted, probably for some time, although I do think we will eventually know. But when you have research paper after research paper showing that even when you feed into, and this is hilarious because the AI note taker is now giving us the takeaways from the meeting, even when you feed a known quantum of information into a generative AI program, it still commits errors, it still hallucinates. And so there is a cost. I absolutely see a world where people use AI in any number of different ways to make their lives easier. I already do it myself, but I think we need to reckon with the fact that right now it is not at that stage where you can make life and death decisions on the basis of AI, and that we're doing it. And so I don't think we can trip over ourselves to use it and point to China as the reason we need to use it faster. And the very last thing I'll say is, the reason I go to the Iran example and the school in Minab is that Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth issued a memorandum overtly saying that the cost of not using AI is greater than the potential non-alignment or imperfect alignment of AI within our mission. So there was a mandate from the top of the military that says, use AI at all costs. Yes, we know it may not be perfect. And it was so aggressive that military units were penalized for not using it, for not adopting it. And so I think we're seeing, sadly, the results of too aggressive AI enforcement right now in this illegal war, and we need to reckon with that.
Can I just say one thing on the China narrative framing specifically, which is a strategic choice by the industry in order to push the button that is the most, useful button to push in DC when you want to get anything done is, this is going to hurt us in our competition with China. But it's like if you ask like the next three questions, it's pretty clear that that framing falls apart. The first thing is, what are we racing for? What are the terms on which we sort of quote unquote win this race? If we're in a race, there's a finish line. What is that finish line? Nobody can define what that is. Okay, so let's say we get there, even if you can define it. It's not like the competition is now over. It doesn't end. There's nothing that says once we reach this milestone that China has to stop developing AI. So they're going to continue to invest in their, AI industry, even if we reach some undefined milestone before they do. So it doesn't make any sense. It doesn't hold up to any scrutiny. The only purpose it serves is that it taps into this sense in DC that we this sort of obsession that people have in DC about this competition we're in with China. So, that's what it's for. That's the purpose that this narrative serves. And they don't believe in it at all because David Sachs says out of one side of his mouth that we need to win this race with China, and out of the other side of his mouth says we need to sell chips to China so that we can control their AI industry. So it doesn't hang together. I think they were making a bet that they were never going to have to sell this to the American people, that they were looking at the example set by crypto, which has no real opposition because people don't see crypto as something that really impacts their lives. And so they only needed to have a conversation with DC about this, and that if they, shape their message to meet the needs of DC, that they would get what they wanted and they wouldn't need to take it any further. And what they are now finding is that that narrative frame that sort of leaves the public out of the conversation doesn't work in this environment, and it's starting to work against them.
Thank you all so much for illustrating so perfectly the different incentives that different decision makers have here, from the general public to folks in Washington, and how they respond to different messaging. And often, right, how there are tragic and preventable results, as in Alvaro's very sobering examples. So we have a few other questions from the audience. I don't think that we'll have time to get to them, but we do want to continue the conversation here at Raben and encourage everybody to reach out to us. I just want to thank the panelists for your time and for your perspective and insights. Thank you for making the time and for lending your expertise. I want to thank everybody who joined, folks who asked questions. There is so much more to unpack here. There's so much more that I wanted to ask you all. So hopefully we get this band back together down the line. For those of you who tuned in, please feel free to reach out to our team at Raben using the info@raben.co email address, or visit our website, raben.co. We are on Facebook, on Instagram, and on LinkedIn. We will be sharing a recording of this town hall after the panel, and we'll be uploading it to our YouTube channel. So that's one way in which we can keep sounding off in the comments and keep this conversation going. Once again, thank you all so much. I learned so much, and I am left with even more questions. So with that, much appreciated. We'll see you all soon.
Thank you.